our group we've been around a while. We'll get into a little bit of our history in a bit, but we have a pretty simple mission. Of course, there's a whole mission statement, as with any group, but we're all about restoring the tower, which we're well along our way, and we're about making it safe for people to use it, and we're about educating people not only about the fire tower, but about the forest preserve and the area right around here too. So, and we'll get into how we do that a little bit. The mountain itself is 2,874 feet high. There's two trailheads. That's about, unless you're with the New York State and you can use their helicopter, then the only way to get up there is to hike. And so there's two trails. The main trail from Keys Mill, right at the site of the old Keys Mill, is 3.4 miles long, and there's a shorter trail, 2.3 from Upper St. Regis Lake, but you have to have a boat to get there, which is a pretty cool way to climb the mountain, especially if you kind of like to combine a little paddling or boating with hiking. So, and there's some folks in here that I've been up that way with. So it's a great way to go, and it's actually the way when we're working up there and we have to lug everything up. We usually get to use the boat from the Hickson's camp and boat over there and then have a little shorter hike. Amazingly enough, the ascent from both of those trails start basically at the lake level of the St. Regis Lake chain, so it's basically the same, 1,260 feet. So moderately strenuous, I guess you might call it, especially as you get towards the top. So some of the early hikers were guests of Paul Smith, and they were usually guided up there. They usually went by boat, usually by a guide boat, to over where Top Ridge is now, and they'd go up between Spectacle Ponds and they'd climb the mountain that way. So that's the oldest, most original, and basically from about halfway up, it's been the same ever since. One of the earliest hikers was a 12-year-old future president, Teddy Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, we could spend all night talking about Roosevelt, and I have friends that do that. But even at 12 years old, he kept a detailed diary. So we have, this is just one little excerpt from his diary here. We have the whole details of that day, who he was with, what they did, what they shot at, the whole 9 yards of everything that Teddy did. And he was considered by his father to be a bit of a weakling of a boy. And his father was out to make him into a man. So climbing St. Regis was the start of that. It wasn't until 5 years later, after Teddy climbed it as a boy, that Verplanck Colvin showed up and used the summit as a triangulation point. He'd obviously been working in the Adirondacks for a while before that, but finally made it to this part of the Adirondacks. And St. Regis is kind of a sentinel that sits above kind of everything else in the northern part of the park. And so it was a great place for Colvin to set up. He and his crews arrived, and there was a bunch of trees and a lot of blowdown on the top of the mountain, and it really made surveying difficult. So they started to gather up the brush, and they decided they would burn it. Except that it wasn't a very good idea because they had to make a hasty retreat and barely saved their equipment. And the top of the mountain burned the rest of that day and all that night. But by the morning it was out, and they resumed their work in the smoldering ashes. The result of which was that it cleared all the vegetation and all the thin soil off the top of the mountain. Not necessarily a good thing, but what it left us with was a magnificent view to this day. So if you go up, if you've been up on St. Regis, then you know that it's a lot of bare rock. And Colvin and his crew had something to do with that. They set a triangulation point, a station mark, one that said VC 16 on it, like the one pictured here. And it was a copper bolt, and that was, the center of that bolt was where they did all the measurements to other mountains from. And but when they came back in 1892, that bolt was gone. It was missing. And a lot of the copper bolts from Colvin did disappear like that. They were easy to kind of pry out and take as souvenirs. So they replaced it with a brass bolt, more of a marker. And this, and now it has, if you look real close, it has Colvin's name on it. That's not the original one. The original one they put in was number 300. The one in the picture is like 286. I think I took that up on Faro. But it has Colvin's name on it. But by now it wasn't the Adirondack Survey anymore. It was the New York State Lands Survey. So this was mark number 300 that he put in the exact same place where the bolt 16 was. I love the illustration on the left-hand side because it shows them, if you have any surveying background, it's called carrying elevation. And that's how they carried elevation. They transferred from a known point, a known elevation point, they transferred that elevation to other points. So you can imagine climbing a mountain. They did this in the ladder survey. The first survey they used barometers to estimate the height of the mountain. But in the ladder survey they did this, they carried that elevation initially from Lake Champlain and to other mountains, and then carried it to St. Regis. And they were within 14 feet of the known elevation, the elevation we know now. So think about how primitive and how difficult that task was. I think it's pretty amazing. The New York State Survey, the Adirondack Survey, kind of started to diminish some. USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, or the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. The USGS took over around 1900. This tower is a picture, and it's believed that this is a tower that USGS built, but it's the exact same design as the tower that Colvin's crew would have built. They would have had a rotating tin signal on the top of this tower that the wind would catch and swirl around and reflect sunlight so it could be seen from other mountains. So that's how they used it to find other places. So the USGS started doing work about 1900, and now there's 3 markers, the one that are kind of greenish brass there. Those are on the mountain right now. And people call those benchmarks, but they're actually not. Benchmarks usually have the known elevation on them. This one, you can read, it says St. Regis 1942. And the other 2 have arrows on them. And one of them says number 1, one of them says number 2. So the triangulation point was set by USGS in 1942. The 2 other points were set as references so they could be reestablished. This was set in the exact same hole as the bolt from Colvin, number 300, because that was missing in 1942 when USGS came up. And there's significance to the 1942 date. 1942 was the first full year that we were involved in World War II. And the entire nation mobilized to be ready for war. And one of those things was to map and inventory the entire country. And this was part of it. And as a forester during my career, we used aerial photos a lot. And the first aerial photos I ever remember using, and this doesn't date me too much, but were 1942 aerial photos from this exact survey that had taken place all across the nation. So 42 is pretty significant.
Is that when they started coming up with topo maps?
Topo maps were before that. Topo maps were, I have a topo map for this area. I think it's There's some 1903, 1908. So the brown topo maps, and then those ones that we had when you were around were the green ones. They came out in the 50s. So, but certainly mapping got better and more accurate after aerial photography became part of the action. So moving off the early days and the markers up there, just to touch on Adirondack forest fires. You know, we actually know now, you know, there's fires been going on out west, but there's been a big one down in the Palisades just now, going on right now, hot spot. But in the west, a lot of forest fires are lightning caused. But in the east, especially around the middle of the 1800s to the turn of the 1900s into 100 years ago, they were mostly man-caused sources. So it was the logging. The Adirondacks didn't look like it looks like now. There weren't a lot of trees around here 100 years ago. Everything got cut, starting with the white pine and then moving on to the spruce and other species, until eventually there wasn't a lot of standing timber in the Adirondacks. It was very much clear cut. And the loggers, they took the logs, they threw them in the river, floated them down to Glens Falls or down the Raquette towards the St. Lawrence, and they cut them up in sawmills in those places and transported them around the nation. But they only took the logs. The tops, they didn't care about. They didn't have chainsaws. So when they got to the end of the merchantable last log that was worth anything, they cut the top off and they left it there. There's big white pines and old growth spruces, and the slash, the logging debris, the slash was known to be like 30 feet deep. And it was all softwood coniferous. And when the sun beat down on it, because there was no trees shading it, got really dry. And it was just a tinderbox. So it didn't take much to set it off. They were using railroads by the turn of the century, and the railroads were steel on steel wheels on rails, produced sparks. The fuel that they burned, coal and wood, sent sparks, and all that tinder. And railroads were, for a while, the #1 cause of fires in the Adirondacks. Campfires were also a culprit. At the same time the logging was going on, the sports were coming to the Adirondacks, and they were camping out, and Smokey hadn't even been heard of yet, so they didn't know anything about prevention. And so there was a lot of fires started by campfires. I found it interesting that starting in 1929 all the way through to 1960, the Conservation Department kept records, and in 1929 smokers became the #1 cause of forest fires in New York State. So there was a lot of fires. And in 1903 and 1908, there were huge fires of western proportions in the Adirondacks. And St. Regis was not immune to those. They got hit with both the 03 and the 08 fires. And the only thing that kept the 08 fire from getting worse was that most of the land had already been burned in the 03 fire. But William Rockefeller, whose family still owns great tracts of land in the Adirondacks, he owned tens of thousands of acres, and he happened to own the acreage on St. Regis Mountain. And he was concerned about his lands, and at the same time, New York State was following the example of Maine and other eastern states that had suffered the same kind of timber harvesting and fire ignition sources, and started to get into the observation business in 1909. Not until 1910 at St. Regis, but William Rockefeller advocated, and we have a stack of letters between Rockefeller's agents and the state of New York going back and forth about getting an observer on the top of St. Regis. So he was instrumental in making that happen. It probably would have happened anyhow, because St. Regis is such a natural. But he owned the land, so that kind of helped. So the observation station itself, active in 1910, but not a tower until 1918. And so that meant that the observer just sat on the top of the mountain and looked out. Some of the mountains, before they had steel towers, had towers that were built from native materials in the forest around, or big trees that were on the top of the mountain that they just put spars on and climbed to the top of and sat on a little platform. St. Regis never had any of those because of Colvin, and you could see everything without additional height. So there wasn't a tower, there wasn't anything there until 1918, except a little tent shelter. But it's one of the longest active observation stations in the entire New York State system, starting in 1910 through 1990, so it's 81 years. And it was continuous operation during that time. The tower that was put up there in 1918 is still the one that stands on the mountain today. Here's a picture of it in its early days, but it's a 35-foot to the base of the cab. So not to the actual top of the roof, add another 7 feet onto that. But to the base of the cab, it's a 35-footer. It's an Aero Motor model, LS40. And they started making windmills out of Chicago and got into the fire tower business when that became even bigger than the windmill business. Some of the earliest towers were just converted windmills. But Aero Motor got into actually making them. In this one, Model 40, they actually sat down with the Forest Service and some of the states and designed this specifically for the Northeast. So this tower is the most common model that we have in the Adirondacks, and 35 feet is the most common footage. In 1926, New York State purchased the 3,800 acres from the Rockefeller estate. William Rockefeller Jr. had died in 2022, and his estate sold the New York State the 3,800 acres, and it became part of the Forest Reserve. A significant date here, which jumps way ahead, is 2005, when the tower was put on the state and national registers of historic places, and that plays into some of our more modern history, actually. The people that were up there, observers, we have Frances Riando in the audience tonight, and she is the wife of an observer on Ampersand Mountain in the 1950s.
56.
56. So Ampersand had an LS40 on it too. It was a 22-footer. But they were showing me before the presentation pictures. Is just wonderful, wonderful to see, for sure. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
So it was, I'm sure Francis can attest, it was probably difficult life on the mountain. So between no modern plumbing and no electricity and having to haul your stuff up, so the observers, they had a tough job, for sure. Initially, they were put on the mountains to protect the forest, of course, but it wasn't long that they actually started to be educators too, because people came up and they wanted to know what they were looking at. They wanted to know about the plants and animals in the area. So the observers became educators too, which became a very important part of their jobs. This picture is classic. I mean, 1939 to 42. Leander Martin. Anybody know any of the Martins from Gabriel's? Because Leander Martin was a Gabriel's boy, and he served there 4 years. And in 1942, as we discussed, That was his last season on the mountain because on January 1st, 1943, he joined the Army Air Corps and was in India for the duration of the war. Came back, settled back in Gabriel's. His son is a friend of mine, and his grandsons and his great-grandchildren still live in the Gabriel's area. So it's quite a tie back to the history. And all the Martins that I've ever known from Gabriel's Paul Smith's area all claim a relationship to Lydia Martin Smith. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there's that claim for sure. So of the observers that were stationed on St. Regis, there were 19 men and 2 women. The 2 women came towards the latter part of the operation of observation on the mountain, but there were women that served as observers, especially during World War II. The longest serving observer was the guy on the upper left, Eddie Sandberg from McCollum's, and Eddie was a colorful guy. I knew Eddie pretty well. And this is a young picture of him because I can't remember Eddie without a waxed handlebar mustache, long. So, do you remember him up on the trail doing trail work, Peggy? No? Okay. But he was there. We used to do trail work with Paul Smith students up on the trail, and he was the observer on duty all those years that we did that. And so we got to know him pretty well. He said the bugs never bothered him because he drank a lot of beer. I think it had more to do with bathing habits, but he definitely didn't seem to be bothered by the bugs when we'd be working up there in June in the mud. They'd be swarming us. St. Regis absolutely was a great place for reporting fires, seeing fires. The first year, 55 were reported, and there's newspaper articles about that, how they saved thousands of acres of land from burning. So it was a good choice. Albert Otis from Otisville, from Paul Smith's. So Otisville is that first part of Keys Mill Road. When you come down Keys Mill Road from Route 30 and the college, that first settlement there is Otis. Was considered Otisville because there were so many Otises. I mean, there was 19 kids. And Albert was one of them. He was a guide at Paul Smith's, and when he got a little older, he decided that it would be easier to go spot smokes on the mountain than it would be to lug guide boats and haul and pull people's deer out of the woods. So he moved up onto St. Regis, and at age 73, a group of Boy Scouts were coming up to help him clean up around the cabin. And when they got there, they started making noise to let him know that he was coming. And they didn't hear anything. And when they got there, Albert was sitting on the porch with his pipe in his mouth, and there was no sound. Certainly other notables, but those are a couple of them. So during those active service years, you'll see some pictures as we go through here of the tower. It's a picture from 1974 when the tower was still active. And interesting thing about that to me is to look and see the amount of vegetation around the tower. Not much. Colvin's deed was still having a pretty major effect in '74. The Summit Tarp Shelter, that's in one of the conservation reports as being on St. Regis. But then it's in another conservation report that it's on Farrell. It's the same picture. So, and I think it's Farrell because I know St. Regis. It doesn't look like St. Regis to me. But that's the kind of thing that was up on St. Regis for the Observer. There are reports that in 1916, a small cabin was built near the summit. There are no pictures, there's no documentation of that other than there's a claim. In the 20s, they standardized the cabins to a 12 by 16 with asphalt shingles on the sides and top. That was towards the summit. But in 1939, there was a new build, and it was much bigger. It was luxurious by fire tower cabin standards. And this one, I could tell, that it was built by the CCCs at Paul Smith's, because they were such excellent stonemasons that you can go around the Paul Smith's area and still find their work. And when I look at these chimneys, and I was in this cabin before it was torn down, you just know it was their work. It's just that impressive. So they must have had some of those boys from New York that had masonry skills in their families, you know. And this is
So when you hike up there, are those the footers that you see on the corner of the building?
Yeah, I think there's still in the site itself. Yeah, there's still a few remnants of the cabin there. It's actually a designated campsite now. Not that many people camp there. Somebody did this year, but not very often. So moving into more modern history, after the tower was closed in 1990, it was abandoned. And within a year or two, Bob Marone, who you may know, some of you may know, was Forest Fire Lieutenant. He went up with the helicopter crew, and they took the bottom two courses of stairs off the tower, stashed them at one of our facilities in Lake Clear. Bob also took all the things that they told him to take to the dump and took them home and put them in his garage because he knew that they were too valuable to throw away. He probably could have got sanctioned for that. But the tower sat vacant from 1990 on. This picture of 2003, you can see a little more vegetation, okay, compared to the last picture we looked at. But take a look at the condition of the tower. You can see it's starting to get a little rough. And that's kind of important as we go here. But finally, after a lot of discussion and animosity and whatever, the DEC finally decided in 2001 enough was enough. The tower is a non-conforming structure in a wilderness area. It has to go. And so they decided they'd have an informational meeting on it. 2001. Okay. September 11th, 2001. The meeting didn't happen until December 2001. And their original plan, which was have a bunch of British commandos blow it up, that didn't seem like such a good idea in December of 2001. So they had a new plan, and that was to take the tower down and put it up on Jenkins Mountain on the Vic. That had been talked about before when the Vic was first opened in the late 80s, but it never got done. So this was their new plan, but they had a meeting just to let everybody know that, hey, we're not destroying your tower, we're just going to move it, you know? A friend of mine said, that's like killing your neighbor's dog and stuffing it and giving him the mouth. Made that comment at that meeting. That comment made the newspaper the next day. So a lot of us commented, and the majority of the people in that auditorium at Paul Smith's College were in favor of preserving the tower. There was a few that wanted to see it removed. And right after that meeting, a woman by the name of Pat Willis, she was the historian for the town of Brighton, she took note of everybody that got up and spoke in favor of keeping the tower, myself included, and she grabbed us all as we were walking out the door, and she got us all shuffled into the back of that auditorium, and she said, we've got to make a plan. And she was looking for hands to go up. I was working for the DEC. I was threading on kind of thin ice, so I kind of declined. But she found a fellow by the name of Dave Petrelli from the Friends of Azure Mountain, and Dave stepped right up. He's an amazing guy. Stepped right up, and within months, he was holding meetings, getting thousands of signatures on petitions that we still have, getting people to write letters, going to town and county boards and getting them to pass resolutions, all in favor of preserving the tower. Made a lot of noise. Dave was a great advocate. And so we started to gain some traction. In 2005, some folks got together and said, you know, if these were historic structures, they'd have to go through a process before they could tear them down. Doesn't mean you can't tear them down. It just means you have to go through a process. So that was applied for and granted. So that kind of put a little we're just kind of slowing the engine down here at this point in time. Finally, in 2006, the unit management plan for the St. Regis canoe area came out. That was the unit that, at that time, the tower sat in the middle of the St. Regis canoe area, a wilderness area, non-conforming structure, a wilderness area. But the fire tower issue was the highest profile issue in that unit management plan. Luckily for us, all the noise that we made caused the state of New York to punt the issue. Instead of calling for the removal of the tower in 2006, they said, we're going to do a study. What do you do when you can't make a decision? You do a study, right? We're going to do a study, and we're going to study all the fire towers that remain standing in the Adirondacks and decide what to do with all of them. So nothing's going to be done on St. Regis until that study's done. It got fast-tracked, and 4 years later, the study came out in February 2010, and we kind of knew the handwriting was on the wall, and that study called for the removal of the tower. Of course, we were pretty devastated, but I think Dave looked at it as a challenge, and he just shifted into a higher gear and started going. And before the study had to go through a public meeting process. And before the park agency could accept the study, it had to go through public meetings. So now we had a place to voice our opinions. And Dave was right there. And somehow or another, we found we were in kind of cahoots with Hurricane. They were going through the same thing, Hurricane Mountain Fire Tower. But somehow or another, we found some sympathetic ears at the Adirondack Park Agency. And by October, they made a decision to reclassify, and they're the ones that are in charge of classification of the forest reserve. They made the decision to reclassify a half an acre of land underneath both St. Regis and Hurricane Mountain Fire Towers to historic. And that opened the door for the towers to then be saved. By then, our tower was in really rough shape. Look at this picture from July of 2015. It's really ready to fall down. And there were some that wanted the towers gone, that was the plan. They can save it all they want. We're just going to let it fall down. But our group, Dave with our leader, kept the feet to the fire and kept on pushing. And by, again, fast-tracked another 4 years, the fire tower historic area unit management plan, one for St. Regis, one for Hurricane, were both approved, signed by the commissioner. And about a month before that happened, there was a group of us, Amy was here, there was a group of us sitting right there where the screen is. And we knew that this was coming. And we started getting organized. And so by the time the UMP was signed, we were ready to go. And we had formed at that meeting that night here in this room, we had formed a partnership with ARCH, Adirondack Architectural Heritage, and they became kind of our a non-profit umbrella group that allowed us to kind of be official, start getting some funds in our coffers. And that was the start. It happened in this room 10 years ago. Pretty significant that we're here tonight. So we were ready to go in 2015. when the state wrote up an agreement, a stewardship agreement with us. And we signed it in late winter that year. We're in our second reiteration of that 5-year agreement, but that allowed us to go, to start. There was one issue. There was this little guy right here. Maybe it's not a guy. Bicknell's thrush. So, if you're a birder, you probably know way more about Bicknell's thrush than I do, but what probably a lot of us know is that Bicknell's thrush is a subalpine species. It likes open summits in the Adirondacks above 2,800 feet. That happens to be what St. Regis is, 2,874, right? So, even though nobody had ever seen, heard, or known of a Bicknell's thrush on St. Regis Mountain, there was a clause in the unit management plan that said that no aircraft or motorized equipment could be used on the summit between May 15th and August 1st. In the Adirondacks, 2.5 months out of your construction season on the top of a mountain is significant. So our group jumped in, got Paul Smith College involved, talked to the ornithology teacher, Brian McAllister, and commissioned him and his class to do a nesting survey during June of 2015. And the results of that nesting survey were that there were no Bicknell's thrush up there. So that cleared the way. It didn't help us in 2015 because the work plan had already been set for that year, but it's helped us every year since then. So in September 2015, we started. In the upper left picture is a student conservation crew out of Whitney. And there were six students and a leader. And then the rest of us are St. Regis volunteers that are in this picture. And we were up there for a week with this crew. The volunteers kind of came and went. The first day we had a whole bunch of people up there, including the forester, Steve Bellamy, who carried the generator on his back all the way to the top of the mountain.
Holy heck.
And so we got a lot of work done that first year. Rich is in the picture there, and me. And we got the stairs placed back in. We got all the wood replaced. We got safety fencing put up. We didn't have everything that met the checklist to be safely open. So even though you could climb it now, you couldn't officially climb it. But the next year, we started right back up. We hired a fire tower contractor down in the lower left-hand corner who put a new roof on for us. And that had to be flown up, of course, as did the supplies for the stair work and all that. And then, of course, the debris has to be flown off. So New York State Police, the aviation unit, in conjunction with the Rangers, they are a great partner with us. Jack Burke and I measuring in 2016, putting these kind of guards in to make the openings in the top tower safe for people to be up there. So we did all this stuff in basically the first year, starting July of 2015, before we did any work. During the work in September 2015, when the SCA crew was there, the next year with a new roof and the cab painted to September 1st, 2016, when we got all the safety stuff in place, and we put up the occupancy sign, and it was open for the public for the first time legally in 26 years. Pretty proud day. We weren't done. Not by a long shot. The cross braces, 24 cross braces, they were all in failure. And at some point afterwards, I'll dig out a piece and show you why. But I call it the 100-year-old manufacturing defect. And when they were made, they did one thing kind of wrong in the galvanization of some of the parts, and it caused corrosion, which took 100 years to have a detrimental effect. And that was to the cross brace ends. So we had to replace all the cross braces, all 24 of them, on top of the mountain. Initial bid we had was like $23,000, and it was no way that we had that kind of money. So we put in for a grant. In 2017, the grant got denied. Back to the drawing board in 2018, found another contractor, found another fabricator for the braces, found a way to get funding from the state and from Cloud Splitter and from donors, and put it all together and did the whole job for about $12,000. It was a great project. That was supposed to happen in 2019, or 2018, excuse me. We had the braces done by the middle of the summer, ready to fly. That was a year of great forest fires again in the Adirondacks, and New York State had used up all their helicopter time fighting forest fire. We had no way to get the braces up to the top of the mountain until the end of October. It was actually Halloween Day in a snowstorm. That we got the braces up there, and the contractor went up beginning of November to work, got about a half day's work in, was camping up there. The next day the tents collapsed from the ice, and there was ice covering everything, and he packed up and left, and we didn't come back until May. And but in May, as soon as we could start hiking, we hiked up, and I hiked up 3 out of 5 days. The contractor and his crew hiked up in the dark every day for 5 days. Started working at daylight, worked until they couldn't see anymore, hiked back down the mountain, and then did it again the next day. I did that for 5 days. Wow. So that was pretty amazing. I only did 3 days, and I hiked at the break of dawn and got down as it was getting too dark to see, and I was exhausted. So those guys did an amazing job for us, and got them all done in 5 days. That same year, 2019, some of you that are local might recognize Michael Stender in the lower right-hand corner. We were concerned about our footings. There's rods that are drilled out and then kind of cemented into the rock that hold this tower on top of this mountain for 106 years. And there was big concern because of the condition of the footings that these rods were no good, which had been the case at other mountains. We got a bid, again, about $22,000 to do them all over again, and I said, I'm not doing any work like that unless I take Michael Stender up there and have him look at it, and whatever he tells me to do is what we'll do. So that's what we did, the whole thing. He did a thorough inspection, taught me how to inspect them. $1,000 later, the job was done. So Michael saved us a whole heck of a lot of money. State Police, again, lower left-hand corner, Kevin Burns just retired as captain from the Ranger Force. There's Kevin hooking up a load of debris from the brace tower. He hiked up on his own one day, said, I got to get that stuff off the mountain. Helicopter's available. He recruited a group of students from North Country School and put them to work. And they got all the stuff off in one day. Pretty cool. And then last year, finally, after 20, 30, 33 years, the flag flew again on St. Regis. And as it was when the observers were there, if somebody's on duty, the flag is flying, the conditions are right, the flag is flying. So if you see the flag up there with your spotting scope, somebody's up there. 2023, the fencing that we did in 2015 wasn't done well. We wanted to get new fencing up. We had a specialty product in mind. Took us a while to get it. Took us a while to get approval to do the work. By the time we got the fencing, it sat in my yard for a year. And we got it up last October 23. Kevin Burns, threw it out the helicopter door on the top of the mountain. We went up and secured it. And then this year we started to put new fencing up. But course, we had to carry everything else up, heavy packs, round mile, round trip mileage from one of the two trailheads. And what's the tool you need when you get to the top of the mountain? The one that's in the truck. And in 1918, when they, put this tower up here, there was no consideration of safety fencing. That didn't come along until the 50s, when there was a tragic accident at a tower in the Catskills, and they started to put chicken wire up around on these towers. So there's no good solution. It's really hard to do this work, especially when you got to haul all that stuff up there. But we're plugging away at it. We didn't get as much done this year as we wanted to. We wanted to fulfill our educational mission, and that was part of that was to getting some panels up. Mark Kurtz is in the room tonight. Mark took the original photos for our panels in 2015, I think, right? 17? Scotty was there too. So we had the photography long before we got the panels up. Mark helped us label everything, and we had to get some approvals, and it got down to Albany, and it got stalled, and finally they compromised. They said, okay, you can put 2 of them up. And so we had the photography for 4, but we settled on 2. We did it in-house, the best we could, with the money we had available. But in 2001, Jack Burt, Jay Schwartz, myself, Rich, we got up there and got those panels in place. But this year, I'm happy to announce we got approval for all 4 panels about a year ago, and thanks to memorial donations made in the honor of our longtime fire tower friend Ed Hickson, who passed away last year. We had the money to have them professionally done. We had all 4 panels done this year, and then we had to get them up to the mountain. So they're not light. There's one on the table. One of the last 2 to put up there. Go over and pick it up and feel how heavy it is. That's Rich with one on his back, and again the heavy packs. Jack in the audience tonight. Jack and Rich went up, installed the west view. Recruited this tall Paul Smith student on the way up, and put him to work. And he made the difference, got the work done. And then we went up a few weeks later, and had the thrill of my life. And, got the north panel put up. So and we still have the temporary panels for the east and the south, but we've got the permanent panels for the north and the west.
OSHA approved, of course.
Yes. OSHA approved, yes, yeah, definitely. And I had an inspector and everything. The other thing we did in the last 2 years was we got the state to put a new kiosk up. And the significance of that for us at the trailhead is it gets people to stop. If it looks inviting and people stop, if there's a reason for them to stop. If not, if it looks like the one down in the lower left, then they just walk by. But if they stop, then maybe they sign the register, maybe they pick up a little information, maybe they look at the map and they get down safe that night. The other thing we did when we put the map up is one of our board members said, well, we need something they can navigate with. So we made 2 maps. We made the one that's posted here, and then we made one that you can link to on your phone that you can use for navigation. So people don't have a reason not to have a map on St. Rita's. If you want that map, you can get it off our website. Part of our education program is having a summit steward. We've had a summit steward on the mountain from 2015, every year except 2020. And it started with 1 day a week for a few years, and Adirondack Watershed Institute donated a steward to us 1 day a week for the first 3 years. And then we started to get funds from the DEC to have a steward up there 3 days a week. And this is Sam. He's a Paul Smith Jr. He was our steward this year. He's a triplet. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Really, really a great guy. And if you climbed up there when he was there, you got to stay. He really is just the most personable guy. And we got them in uniform this year, too. Another thing we got going on at the Vic, thanks to Scott, is that we started to put a display together. And this is kind of some of the stuff that Scott, Bob Marone, other rangers didn't take to the dump when they were supposed to. And the radio is really cool because we knew this radio existed. We had it in our hands once, years ago, but it disappeared again. We found it. And the guy that had it had gotten it legally, had bought it at auction from the state, and gave it to us. So it's certainly, a priceless antique. And just within the last month, the Adirondack Experience, the museum at Blue Mountain Lake, donated a display case to us. We've been retrofitting that display case, and we hope that very shortly we have the radio and other things on display at the Vic. None of this is possible by ourselves. It takes a lot of partners, starting with that meeting right here with Historic Saranac Lake and Arch, and Pat Willis and Tom Brighton and all those people. But we have some great partners. The DEC, New York State Aviation, those guys are amazing. They can drop a set of braces that weighs hundreds of pounds on a quarter at the top of the mountain in the wind. I mean, it's just amazing, their skill. And we had this great partnership with Paul Smith, both at the Vic and originally with the Adirondack Watershed Institute. Lake Clear Lodge, they hold an annual fundraising dinner for us where we light the tower along with about 30 other towers in New York State on Labor Day weekend. And Arch, Historic Saranac Lake, we had one donor who never wanted his name done. I didn't even know his name. And who donated for our 3 big projects, the braces, the roof, some of the panels. And Cloud Splitter Foundation, great story about them. I'm going to find my piece of metal here. Great story about them. Scotty Adams arranged to meet with the grant administrator for the Cloud Splitter Foundation. We needed a couple $1,000 to get the braces fabricated. Had a great meeting at Blue Moon Cafe, nice breakfast, and we were pretty sure we were going to get the grant. But then when I was trying to explain what we were doing, I reached under the table, and you can look back at me, and I pulled out this piece of metal. And I showed her the 100-year-old manufacturing defect in the braces. And then she did just what Nancy's doing now. She took my picture. And when she went to the board to get the grant, they gave us the grant immediately. So this piece of metal has some significance in that. And of course, the funds we got in Memory of Ed, and tons, just hundreds of small donations, from a few dollars to a few $100. And we give gifts, by the way, they're here tonight, that when people give us a gift, we give them a hat or a patch or a sticker, bigger stickers than the ones I gave you tonight, by the way. So that's been a big help too. Like everybody, and I did want to also say that Arch are no longer our parent group. Scotty does a nonprofit through about a year and a half worth of work, I think, Scotty.
It wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad, she said.
It was just so legit.
But we're our own nonprofit now. So current projects I reviewed with you already, replacing the safety fencing, putting up new panels, our display at the Vic, our Summit Stewart program, buying uniforms for them, and giving out stickers and all that stuff, and working with Paul Smith. So those are the kind of things we're working on now. We got a great board, but we welcome new members. And so I think I mentioned a lot of these names already. Nancy, I don't know if I mentioned Nancy's name. Bob Brandt, seasonal resident, who lives on Lake Clear, looks at the mountain every day that he's here. That the weather's clear. Jack Burke's in the audience. Tom Hirschblom, Smitty that we recruited on the trail, and not the one in the picture, an older one. Found out we were both white piners. And Jack Drury, who we just recruited in the last couple of years to head up our education, and Ed. So I gave out cards. There's cards on the table. Feel free to reach out to us. And we welcome you to help.
We have a wonderful website.
Yes, we have a great website. Rich and Scotty, and it's a repository of history. When I review for these kind of things, I go and I read all the historical stuff. So, it's definitely check out the website. There's a lot of great information. Questions?
When I was going to Paul's Fest a long time ago, somebody told me that the governor of New York had a vacation home somewhere. You had the name Rockefeller there. I don't know.
Well, the Governor Carey used to come to Toppridge when the state owned Toppridge after Marjorie Merriweather Post left it to the state. Governor Carey used to come. And we always knew that because our friends that lived on Keys Mill Road would tell us about all the state police cars that came down the road. Yeah, so that may be who you're thinking of.
Or the Bay Pond connection, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Other questions?
So the legs, are the original legs still dug?
The legs, the cab, the roof is new, and the braces are new. The stairs we took them off the pile in Lake Clear and took them right back up there. Put them off. The wood is new, fencing's new. So yeah, combination new and old. It's a great question because it's a historic structure, so we want to honor how it was built, and so having those braces made, we originally went to like Jefford Steel. Oh yeah, we can make those. Well, not like they made them in 1918, and oh no, we can't do that. And well, that's the way we need it. So we found this guy in Osable that did it for us, local guy. He fixed the manufacturing defect, by the way. And he made them so that 100 years from now, nobody will have to replace it. That's not going to happen. But a big thing was the bolts. So the bolts that were there in the tower, that are in the tower, were just hand forged forged in the same factory that made the tower out of low carbon steel. No engineer in his right mind approves those, right? They don't meet modern standards. So we have engineered spec bolts. So they're hex head, they're not square like the original bolts. So there are a few things that aren't quite the same. The braces are a little thicker. They're 3/16 instead of 1/8. 1/8 would have been fine, but the engineers didn't understand the manufacturing defect, so they wanted thicker steel. It caused problems.
Lightning storms. How safe is?
Not very safe. Get off the mountain.
Well, that's usually number one. You get rid of the aluminum pole that you got in your hand first off,
Yeah,
or the fishing pole.
much less a steel tower.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you had to be venture seeing some of the storms that were close by.
Oh yeah, the tower was hit for sure. I mean, I don't see like trees. I can see physical evidence of strokes, but
yeah.
I've never really
Or down the
seen
trail,
it.
the big pines.
Right, exactly.
Because I happened to be fishing on Regis, and I was just pull into the lean-to. It didn't matter. Those pine trees are still just close to the lean-to it was if I was in the aluminum boat. So, I've been up there at Regis, and there's some good storms that gone through. So,
When we first became the adopters of the tower, I got a call from a lightning rod salesman. And I was like, the whole thing is a lightning rod.
Plus,
We didn't buy it.
plus yourself.
Yeah, Amy.
So it's such a wonderful success story and such a great story of people coming together and working hard for a long time to make this happen. I'm wondering if, like, are there a lot of examples of this with other fire towers? Is this sort of
Hurricanes are equivalent. Hurricane crew and us are pretty much on a par as far as the battle, the length of the battle, because it was in a wilderness area, non-conforming structure. A lot of the other ones are in wild forests, so they don't have that non-conforming status. So they didn't have to fight that battle. But we lost, half the fire towers in the Adirondacks are gone because they took them out of service in 1970 and beyond. And the last one's 1990. And as they took them out of service, some of them they sold like right away. Some of them got relocated. I have a list. It's really complicated to see how many towers there were and which ones got moved, which ones came down. But we have about half the number of fire towers and about 26 towers, I think, standing in the Adirondacks on public and private lands. So, there was over 50 at one time.
When you had the annual lighting of the towers, you actually had some people go up to the towers and turn the light on and pipe back down with flashlights.
Yeah, Rich. There's the guy you want to talk to right there. So we have a crew of like 3 people that go up, and they have a combination of Coleman lanterns, LED lights, and every kind of thing you can imagine. They hike up in the daylight, but they hike down at night. They give us a call about midnight and say we're down because the tower lighting takes place between 9 and 9:30 on Saturday or Labor Day weekend. Except this year when it rained. And so it's, yeah. So they do that. They do. But they love it, right, Rich? You love it.
Especially this year.
Mud and rain and cold. Yeah.
Rain,
For sure.
And it was a challenge to see it for those of us that were on the shores of Lake Clear at the dinner. The clouds were a challenge. We could kind of see it, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's like we get the people at the dinner all psyched up. We're going to walk down the shore and we're going to see this light on the tower. And then this little tiny dot. And they go, oh. But some nights, when it's really clear and the lake is calm and flat, that light actually reflects all the way like it's a beam shining in our eyes. So it can be pretty cool.
Check out our website, and if you're a Facebook user, we have some great photography from local people that have contributed.
Yeah, if you're up on the mountain, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The eclipse was too. A lot of people were taking pictures of the eclipses on the towers.
Yeah, there were people up there. Somebody got lost up there that day. The rangers had to go. It was our local forest ranger, Matt Adams, the local boy that grew up in Saranac Lake. It was his first search on St. Regis, I think, was that. Not his first search, but his first search on St. Regis.
Doug,
Yeah.
along the lines of what Amy was saying, isn't there a statewide organization or association of fire towers?
Yeah, it's called, the abbreviation is FFLA, Forest Fire Lookout Association. And so all the towers have, if they don't have a group that's associated with them, then they have somebody that's designated. FFLA, like the statewide organization, has Loon Lake because there's no local group for Loon Lake. So that's one that badly needs restoration. That's in danger of not standing on its own much longer. But FFLA is the official adopter of that, but we're waiting on engineers and bureaucracy on that one. Not me. I'm St. Regis guy. Somebody else probably like. Hey, is that you? No. Okay.
Does DEC require you to have some sort of structural inspection every so often?
They did an engineer's inspection before we could start. They haven't done one since. But I still know a lot of guys in that office, so, you know, I usually call them up and talk to them once in a while. So they're still trusting me, even though I'm getting older. So. Anything else? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Where was the cabin?
So the cabin was about midway up the mountain, right where you cross a little stream. There's a bridge across the stream. So the observer could actually drive to that point. There was a little garage. When I used to take the students up there to do work on the trails, I used to load them in the back of my pickup truck back when those things were allowed. And we would drive up that trail road to that point, and then we'd hike up from there to work. But the observer, Eddie Sandberg, he had a vehicle. Some observers didn't have vehicles, and they had to stay on the mountain. But Eddie had a vehicle, and he lived in McCollums, and he drove up every day. Had to drive through Top Ridge, through a gate, and then up to that point, up just about to the stream, across the bridge, and then the cabin was, you cross the bridge, go out, and there's a little tiny trail that goes off to the left, a little spot.
Yeah, that was the original trail.
The original trail is by that bridge also. So that's used a lot by visitors to Top Ridge. They kind of use that as an old trail, the old trail.
So I think I remember reading a couple of years ago about there's one national forest in the southwest that still has active fire towers with.
There's actually a lot of active fire
Or
towers.
there's
Yeah,
still-
especially in the west.
Yeah.
But Pennsylvania has active towers still in the east. I think maybe New Jersey, they were talking about, after this year, probably New Jersey. And the Catskills will have some active towers. So, yeah, but there are still some active towers in the east. But out west, they're fairly common. So, I just saw a picture of one recently wrapped in fire wrap because the forest fire was coming right up over the top of the mountain. They were trying to protect the tower.
Well, and their structures aren't necessarily way up on lakes
No.
because they're above tree line.
Right. And they live in their structures. Out west.
What is the currently in the Adirondacks that's keeping your eye off the fires?
It's called citizen reporting, right, Scott? Is that what you call it?
I think that's accurate.
Yeah. So it's just like, you know, there's not many anymore to be, you know, to start with. Not like there was 100 years ago. And there's everybody carries one of these, right? And everybody is really easy to call when they see something they don't think is right. So, you know, so it's citizen reporting. When they first started to take the towers out of commission, they used planes and plane spotters, but that didn't last too long. 5 years maybe?
Yeah, I think they still have the protocol that if they reach certain fire danger that they'll do overflights, but I think it's been a while since they've done,
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably been 10, 15 years since we've done preventative overflights.
So, and there's just, like I said, 2018, that was a fire year, but there hasn't been that many. Other questions? We'll hang out. I know some people want to kind of get going, get dinner, whatever, you know, but definitely we'll be around. So, you know.